Dimension W, Episode 8, The Island That Fell into Nothingness. I really enjoyed this episode for not only the cool backstory that we got, but we really got a lot of interesting moments with all of the characters in this episode where the collectors are all kind of, by the end at least, they all kind of decide to separate and go their own route because they all want, the 50 million for themselves. But in the beginning of this, we get a pretty cool backstory for Prince Salva and how he grew up and he was an orphan and how he was raised, and then the king and the queen found out that they actually could have a child, so he's kind of relegated to permanently be the prince because the true blood heir, has been born. So now he has to raise his younger brother as, a worthy successor to the throne. And I kind of like the way they did it because normally in those situations it's like, oh, the older person ends up getting jealous and stuff, but it seemed like he was fine with it. We still didn't get a ton of backstory, so we still don't understand how the younger prince, because I can't remember the young boy's name. We can't remember. We aren't seeing how he becomes a robot or exactly how much of a robot he is. Because I just assume like he's full robot. But I mean, considering we have such advanced AI like Mira, and the fact that they show that he's an actual child, it kind of threw me off. I was like, okay, so he's not actually just a robot. He's probably like part robot, and maybe something. He was just in a crazy situation, and so most of his body is robotic, if not all of it from the neck down, because he has a full body suit. So maybe just some really crazy stuff happened, and he's basically robot from the neck down, but he is just his actual self because during the scene where Sal was like, I want to make this world and I want you to grow up to be the king, he was playing with a samurai toy. So I'm like, okay, so either this is a robotic version of the young boy that died, and they somehow kind of kept his mind, or he was in a crazy accident, so he's like robotic and throughout most of his body. Maybe the suit's just kind of there to hold him together. But I really enjoyed that. I was like, okay, that's a cool backstory. It was nice to see that it wasn't the typical response because, like I said, normally it's like, oh, now I'm angry at the younger brother and stuff. And I was like, man, maybe he killed him or, tried to kill him or something, and that's why they made the robot version of the young boy. But he seemed totally fine. Another little bit of information that was given out is that Central 60 was, or the centrals, I guess, whatever they call like the central, is actually a place where the tower is. And I mentioned that in the last episode where the, ooh, I want to say Russian guy, I can't remember if his name was Russian or German, but it mentioned that he destroyed Central 3. And I was like, I don't know if that's a city or what, but I guess that means he destroyed either the entire city or the tower itself was Central 3. But they said like, oh, this is the 60th. Like basically it was the final tower, so it's Central 60. And I was like, that's actually very cool because it gave me that little bit of information, and it shows that one collector guy who, I don't know what's gonna happen to him now since KK like knocked him down and paralyzed him, but he destroyed either an entire tower or he destroyed the whole city. But I'm guessing the centrals count as just the tower specifically. So he destroyed a whole tower at some point, and I don't know if that will come up again, but I feel like that's fairly important because they make these towers to keep coils regulated. So I'm kind of interested if we'll get any sort of backstory on his character because I feel like there's a lot of possibility there, but maybe we won't. Maybe it won't ultimately end up being too important. But he gets taken down by KK while fighting a robot, and he opens up this briefcase, and it's just like syringes and like those little curved medical scissors and stuff. And he's like, I'm gonna do an experiment, and I'm like, he's like the black version of Hugo Strange from Batman, which is really bad because Hugo Strange is like this crazy scientific guy who does these really crazy experiments and weird tests on people and stuff like that. And it's just like, okay, I don't know what to expect from this, but there's a big robot, and I'm pretty sure he didn't destroy the robot. He was still in the middle of fighting, and then KK was just like, boom, and he knocked him and, paralyzed him. But they're in the middle of a battlefield, and he's like, alright, I'm going to do an experiment. And all he has are, like, blades and syringes and scissors. So I don't know what to expect. I don't know if I feel like he's going to chop him up or cut parts and put them in different places or do some, like, really crazy stuff to him. Because otherwise, I can't understand what else he could possibly be doing. So, kind of freaked out what we're going to be seeing. I don't know how gruesome they're going to end up getting, but I I mean, we saw like the weird dimensional stuff where people's faces are like split, and copied like 50 times. So they can kind of go a little far, even if it's an actual person. So I am kind of looking forward to that. I don't know what to really expect from it or how crazy it's gonna look, but I'm assuming it's gonna get pretty bad. So excited to see that. We get to see the mole twins kind of doing their thing, and we kind of see what specialties each one has. The girl, she actually digs with like giant hand coils, I guess, and then the boy just uses a shovel, which kind of sucks. But they actually end up helping Kyoma and Mira. Well, actually, Kyoma and Mira end up helping them, but ultimately they're all kind of together at this point, and they had a really great moment when they're driving and they go through. We actually get to see the nothingness, and I thought that was actually very cool. And they're kind of shooting through, and Mira is in the middle of her sentence and she shuts down. And I think my favorite part about that is she didn't even realize it. It was almost like time froze for her, because once they were out and she like reactivated, she was instantly right back to the same sentence. And for her, it's like time just skipped. And I kind of thought that was really cool because it shows how it affects the coils. Because I always assumed that it just, like they power it down or something. But it was seriously like in the middle, it just froze them. And it wasn't like, oh, they power it down and they have to reboot. It was just like a complete stop right where they were. And, she starts right back up and it's exactly the same place. So really enjoyed that. We got to see the effects on human bodies and Kyoma's. He mentions like it's like the blood's being drained from his body and he's close to dying and he's falling unconscious. And the girl on top of the car, she does pass out, but fortunately her brother is able to grab her. And then once they kind of get out, Kyoma like snaps right out of it and he dodges the robot. So that I thought was actually a great little show. Loved the way they ended the episode because it's like, this is the tunnel leading straight to basically the official answers. And Kyoma was kind of frozen in place for a little, and he's like, you know what? I gotta do this to get answers and to know what went wrong here and to try to move past like basically the worst day of his entire life, even if it's just the half of losing his friends and not the woman that he loved. It's still the second half of something that he wasn't able to let go because he didn't even know what there was to let go of. So he pushes himself, and then here comes Loser, and I got super excited, and then of course it went off, and I was like, they do some great cliffhangers sometimes, and I was so mad. I was like, crap, like I wanted to see them fight. I'm assuming they're gonna both kind of get away from the situation, okay? Because I mentioned before, Loser has to end up being like the nemesis character. I feel like he just has to be based on his goal with numbers, and he needs only one more. I still don't, I guess he didn't have any other leads because I still don't understand why he would bother going to the island to do that when it's so risky. But I guess that's the case. He just didn't have any more leads because he also because we got to see him in the other episode where he had a lead and it turned out to not be a number anyway. So he knew that this would be one, and considering he's a robot, he could probably take on anyone pretty much without too much consequence because he's mostly robot. So pain and all that stuff doesn't really apply to him unless it's like right here, because that seems to be the only part of him that's really human anymore. But looking forward to what's going to happen with them for sure. That was exciting. We got a little bit of info on this Nothingness sphere, which I thought was very cool, and it turns out that it only goes after guys. So I don't know what that means. Kind of leads me a little bit back to Mrs. Yurizaki if she was on the island during that attack, because that kind of just seemed like the thing. There were guys that attacked them, and it could be like just the last thought is still a sphere, so it might not be that conscious, but it might be conscious enough to recognize that, like, oh, it was guys that killed me and my daughter, and maybe that's all it is, all there is to it. But I'm looking forward to seeing what goes on with that. One thing that was kind of weird is that we don't get to see the character, the Morgan character in this episode. She was safe from the sphere because it didn't attack them on the ship, but she wasn't anywhere in this episode. And they had like all the collectors were basically in the same area, and they went to this little cabin and everything, but she didn't show up. So I don't know what's going to happen with her. We do have Salva. He's still knocked out, and his guard. I'm guessing she's his guard. And I wish I have to try to get into remembering their names. But we find out that she's she wasn't knocked unconscious because she was the one that tells us about it goes only after guys. So the prince is kind of taken off. All the collectors are continuing the mission because now we've seen the video that Salva is left behind for everybody. So I'm looking forward to what's going to be happening. I think this was a pretty cool episode. Um, I was hoping because of what happened in the beginning that Albert would have to stay on the island because I thought it would be cool to see Kyoma and Albert team up. But unfortunately, he was like, oh, kind of everything's fine, so he was still able to take off. But he does mention that he notices how well, it was like, AI are so flexible these days, or emotions are so flexible these days. So I thought that was really cool that he mentioned that. And I thought he was going to say something when they drove away, like she's something different, but he didn't exactly go there. So I don't know if that's in his mind or not, but he certainly noticed that Mira has some interesting qualities for an AI. She has certain reactions that most AI just wouldn't have. So I enjoyed the fact that he said that. As far as Loser and his daughter, whatever's going on there, we get like a little flash. So now we're gonna get some backstory for Loser. Maybe not in this next episode, but somewhere we're gonna be getting some backstory. And I don't know if I'm thinking now, the boy or girl might actually be a robot. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, because they have it, because he calls her Ellie, and in the previous episode, Ellie mentioned like, "Oh, I think I'm getting used to this disguise," but I feel like Mira would say the same thing because she's such an advanced AI. It could easily be the same case, and we also got to see Ellie like fly down with like some crazy giant wings, and I was like, okay, that can't just be out of nowhere. So I think Ellie might actually be a robot, and I think it was a boy at first, and maybe it was because he didn't want, like the vision he had in this episode where it was his actual daughter who had long blonde hair. So maybe that's why he had it as a boy to begin with, because he didn't want to have that sort of connection. But because he had to switch, they just went with the whole Ellie thing, and maybe that's why he did it. Maybe it was like he felt he was strong enough to not be affected by it or something. But I'm starting to think that Ellie might actually be a robot as well, especially with the wing stuff. I was like, okay, it was just disguises for a second, and then just like giant wings that completely disappeared as well. Like Ellie landed with giant like bird wings out of her like stomach basically, and then she landed and she's like drying her hair and he's talking, and there's like nothing. They didn't seem like they were folded up. Granted, that could be the case where they're like just folded perfectly behind her back, but I kind of doubt it. And I'm thinking it's either some crazy like construction, like they instantly form type of deal, like that you can make constructs or something, or and I guess that would have to be the case even if Ellie was a robot, because the wings, I mean, unless they like mechanically folded inside like a transformer, which if it's a robot, I guess that could easily be the case, because technically you'd only need a core to power everything else. So that, I guess that could actually work because it's a robot, if it's a robot. But I'm kind of thinking that Ellie might not be an actual person, and Ellie might end up being a robot. It's hard. It's so hard to tell though, because all the technology that they have, and the whole Dimension W stuff, limitless possibilities. The one guy literally was flying in this episode. The American guy, the #1 collector from America, he literally just jumped and was flying through the air. So it's like, who knows? I mean, it is an alternate dimension, and we've seen the possibilities. So it's like, that could easily just be some crazy use of coils that we haven't seen yet, where they can make stuff that wouldn't naturally exist. So I don't know. I mean, if coils can make you fly, if coils can make giant hands that can dig through the ground, I guess it's not that crazy that they can make wings that'll disappear. Because the girl didn't have. Well, I don't believe she had the mole girl. I don't believe she had the giant hands the entire time, but she may have. I don't really remember. But I don't know what's going on with Ellie. I really can't. I'm trying to figure that out. But little glimpses here. Loser, super cool landing in front of the car at the end. So very excited for that. But this was a fun episode. We got like a little zombie thing in this episode as well, and I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh, they might be going back a little bit to the horror aspect of things. But the island's waking up, so all the robots have kicked on. Even people that were dying or that were kind of stuck have started to move around a little, even though they weren't like in their complete normal forms. So weird stuff is starting to happen because all these people have kind of landed on the island and basically activated, the nothingness and the almost nothingness, I guess, which would be the sphere. So weird things are definitely happening. Salva's still knocked out. Sanchos is still knocked out, and since we haven't seen anything from Sanchos, I'm sure there's going to be some way where they can cure them, and then we'll see Cassidy and Sanchos as the actual team. Because otherwise, they just introduce a character, and it's like a really weird mystery because he's got like the mask and you can't see his eyes and stuff. And it's like, what does he do? And he's completely knocked out. So I'm sure they'll figure that out. Maybe before they get off the island, we'll get to maybe see what he can do. But looking forward to it. Not too sure, if it really matters whether or not the prince wakes up. I'm sure, like I said, he will. But as long as the mission is complete, I don't think it really matters, for him. But I'm sure it won't be because either Kyoma or Loser are going to get that. It's going to be one of them. Because if the prince got it, it would kind of just end. And they'd have to kind of move on. And Loser could still go on to, find another number. But I think, between the two of them, I think Loser might end up getting the coil just because that would be an easy way to expand the story. And if Kyoma got it and tried to destroy it, or did destroy it, maybe Loser would kind of make him, like, a target. Because it's like, you destroyed, like, one of my greatest leads is, like, the last one I needed, and you took that chance from me. So, there's definitely some possibilities. A random thing about Salva, and this, depends on you guys if you know what channel this is, but every time I see Salva, even when I first saw episode 7, when I thought it was episode 1, I was like, he reminds me of Dan from Game Grumps, just because of the long hair. I don't know why. They don't look alike. Dan is white. But for some reason, his hair makes me think of Dan from Game Grumps. So you guys can look that up. And I was just like, every time I see him, I'm like, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I think of the animation stuff that people do for the Game Grumps stuff. But every time I see him, I'm like, he just reminds me of Dan from Game Grumps. They don't actually look alike, but I don't know. Every time I see it, I wanted to mention that just because it was on my mind every time I see him, but I never talked about it. But super random. Wanted to talk about that though. But definitely enjoyed this episode. I cannot wait to see what happens between Kyoma and Loser. I just want to see them actually get into a real fight. But I definitely want to know what you guys thought about this episode. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And I want to know what, I already asked the question for the last one. What do you guys think about this sphere? But now that we know it only goes after men, who do you think this sphere is based on? It might not be a person in a different form, but because of the whole dimensional thing and us still not knowing who was on that island, we technically, the doctor could have been on that island. It's a giant island. He could have been working in a facility, and, his wife and child could have been working at home, which was still on that island, because there were a ton of people there. So, it's like it embodies somebody, and it could be Mrs. Yurizaki because guys technically killed her. It could be their daughter if you really think about it. I feel like there's so many possibilities because we still don't really know who was and wasn't on that island, and I feel like everyone was on that island even though we don't know it yet, and that's kind of what I feel like. This has to be someone that we know, but I want to know your guesses. Who do you guys think that this sphere is embodying, as it goes after people? Because it's only going after guys, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a guy that's doing it. So, there's only like one guy I can think of. So far, no one else has really been kind of played up who's died. I mean, outside of like the boss of the Grendel team, but I don't think he'd be the one doing that. That seems really weird. But there is also the fact that we don't effing know what happened during that entire battle. It could be any of those guys technically, but I want to know who you guys think the sphere is actually embodying, and also why it's only going after men as well. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.